By the 14th century BC, the 18th dynasty of Egypt had achieved total dominance. Under Pharaoh Amenhotep III, military victories poured vast amounts of gold and tribute into the capital, creating a society operating at the absolute peak of its wealth and stability. You can see this absolute confidence reflected in the art of the time. For centuries, pharaohs were depicted through a strict, idealized set of proportions, stiff, broad-shouldered, and projecting eternal, unchanging order. Behind the throne, the real political engine was the priesthood. While Egypt worshipped many gods, the cult of Amun held the most influence. Operating out of the massive Karnak temple complex, these priests controlled vast estates, grain reserves, and political networks that rivaled the pharaoh himself. The plan was for Amenhotep III's eldest son, Crown Prince Thutmose, to inherit this well-oiled machine. But Thutmose died unexpectedly. The throne fell to his younger, unproven brother, Amenhotep IV. The new pharaoh inherited an empire with full coffers, secure borders, and a religious hierarchy that kept the entire population in check. The system worked perfectly. For the first 4 years of his reign, Amenhotep IV followed the established playbook. He commissioned traditional monuments and maintained the expected relationships with the priesthood. Then, in his 5th regnal year, the young king abruptly changed course. He discarded the name Amenhotep, which meant Amun is satisfied. Instead, he declared himself Akhenaten, beneficial to the Aten. This was followed by a decree that dismantled centuries of Egyptian theology. The worship of the traditional pantheon of gods was outlawed. From that moment on, the state would recognize only a single deity. With the old gods banished, Akhenaten packed up the royal court and abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes. He moved hundreds of miles north to establish a new city on a desolate, unpopulated stretch of desert. A ruler presiding over a flawless, immensely wealthy empire dismantled its core institutions in a matter of months. Understanding why requires looking at who stood to lose the most from his decisions. The new religion, Atenism, elevated a minor solar deity, the Aten, represented strictly as a sun disk with extending rays, to the position of the supreme and exclusive god of Egypt. This theological pivot had immediate practical consequences. Under the old system, a massive percentage of Egypt's agricultural wealth, tax revenue, and land was funneled directly into the temples controlled by the priests of Amun. By declaring the Aten the sole god and placing himself as the Aten's only prophet, Akhenaten legally dissolved the priesthood. The flow of resources was aggressively rerouted. All wealth, offerings, and power now bypassed the priests and went directly to the pharaoh. Some historians view this strictly as a cynical political coup aimed at centralizing power. Others argue the king experienced a genuine spiritual revelation, driven by a religious fervor that inadvertently planted the earliest seeds of monotheism. Whether motivated by divine inspiration or raw ambition, the result was exactly the same. Akhenaten successfully stripped the political establishment of its leverage and placed absolute authority entirely in his own hands. To insulate his new order from the lingering influence of the old priests, Akhenaten required a blank slate. He chose a barren bay of cliffs halfway between the old power centers of Memphis and Thebes to build his new capital, Akhetaten. Constructing an entire city from scratch usually took decades, but Akhetaten was erected in just a few years. Architects achieved this by inventing talatat, smaller, standardized limestone blocks that unskilled laborers could easily carry and stack at high speeds. The buildings themselves rejected tradition. Instead of the dark, enclosed, and highly secretive sanctuaries favored by the Amun priesthood, Akhenaten's temples were left entirely unroofed. Worship took place on open-air altars, meant to be directly bathed in the sunlight of the Aten.
Every aspect of the remote desert city, from its geographic isolation to its rapid construction and open architecture, served as a physical rejection of Egypt's history. This rejection extended into the royal workshops. For the first time in Egyptian history, the pharaoh and his wife, Queen Nefertiti, were depicted in highly intimate, relaxed scenes, playing with their daughters under the rays of the sun disk. But the most striking element of Amarna-era art is the depiction of Akhenaten himself. The rigid, muscular ideal of the past was replaced by a highly unconventional figure featuring an elongated face, a narrow chest, a sagging belly, and wide hips. For decades, scholars suspected these features were the result of a genetic disease, like Marfan syndrome, but medical theories struggle to account for the pharaoh's proven fertility, and recent genetic studies of surviving royal mummies show no evidence of such disorders. The historical consensus points to theology, not biology. The Aten was worshipped as the mother and father of all people. As the sole earthly representative of that god, Akhenaten likely commanded his artists to depict him with an androgynous body, to embody both male and female generative forces. The strange proportions were a carefully engineered piece of visual propaganda, designed to separate him from normal humanity and elevate him to the status of a living god. Because of his intense religious focus, a persistent myth developed that Akhenaten was a distracted pacifist. The assumption was that while he composed hymns to the sun, he allowed Egypt's military might to atrophy and its borders to crumble. The archaeological record tells a different story. Relief blocks recovered from his building projects at Karnak clearly depict heavily armed Egyptian infantry, equipped with large shields and spears, marching in organized formations. The state also continued to produce violent propaganda to project strength. Drawings recovered from the era depict Queen Nefertiti herself stepping into the traditional role of conqueror, actively smiting captives and trampling foreign enemies. Akhenaten never abandoned the military apparatus that made his empire wealthy. He simply absorbed it, reorienting the army to protect and serve his new centralized religious order. After 17 years on the throne, Akhenaten died. He left behind an empire culturally fractured by forced religious conversions and an economy severely strained by the massive costs of building a new capital from scratch. His dangerous tyrant who pushed a golden empire to the brink.